Welcome to the start of a new tutorial series, and this is called Teach Me Django, which is a project built with Django and React, showing you how you can work with multiple users in a kind of mock online system where you can create assignments, fill them in, and see the results of those assignments on your profile. And so this is the finished product of that project, and what I'm going to do is just walk you through what it looks like so you get an idea of what we're actually working towards in this tutorial series. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. And I already have a user created for this. And we don't have any assignments just yet, so we'll go ahead and create one. So we'll give it a title as this is the first assignment. We'll set the question to be, is this cool? We'll say the answer is yes, and then we'll add a choice where the first one can be yes and the second one can be no. And then we can add a question, and we'll say this one is Django is awesome. We'll say the answer is true, and the choices are true and false. And then we can submit this. And now we have our assignments. An assignment that is loaded here. And we can click on it and we see we get the questions here. And we've only got 2 questions. So we've got, is this cool? We'll say yes. Go to the next one. We'll see Django is awesome. And let's say I want to go back and I'm actually going to change my answer. We'll say, no, this isn't cool. Go forward. Django is awesome. We'll say true. And we can click submit. And if we head over to our profile, you can see we got 50% for that assignment. And that's because we said that Django is not cool, whereas the answer was yes, it actually is cool. And so before judging how complete this project is in terms of validation and seeing detail views and thinking there's a lot more stuff to be displayed and that this is really just too basic, you'll be surprised as to how much actually goes on in the backend to get this to work. And so we're going to be jumping into a whole lot of customization of serializers and a lot of React as well. So this is what we're going to be building in this project, where the 2 different kinds of users we're looking at are students and teachers. Only teachers can actually create these assignments, and only students, in theory, should be allowed to answer these assignments. And so we're going to walk you through the process of creating this multiple user system, and let's get started with it now. So to get started, you're going to want to open up VS Code. I've got absolutely nothing here. An empty directory which we'll use to store all the project content. And to get started, we're actually going to clone something from our GitHub page, and this is a boilerplate project that we created for getting started with Django and React. And that is here, the Django React boilerplate. And this is just to help getting started with adding projects that are built with Django and React, because it seems that we're going to be doing this for quite a while. So I'm just going to grab this URL here, and we're going to clone into this repository. So we'll just say git clone, and that will bring this repository into this folder. And so there we have it. We've got the VS Code project settings. We've got a home directory, which is basically our Django project. And we are currently using 3 different settings files, depending on whether you're in production or development. And then we have a source folder which has a basic React project set up as well. Now, I'll link a video showing you everything that's contained inside this project, which we covered in one of our videos showing you how to set up authentication between Django and React. So everything in that video we basically took and just compiled it into a boilerplate repository so that we could just pull that easily, so we don't have to keep on repeating ourselves. That way we already have a nice setup to get started with, and we can get working from here. So what I'm going to do is just bring all of the folder contents inside this directory that I'm working with. And there we go. Now I'll just clear out the terminal, and we can take a look at what we've got. We've got the VS Code settings, which basically is just setting pylint and the Python path, the virtual environment path, and some files to exclude in our VS Code editor. We've got the home directory, which has a base settings for all the installed apps, middleware, templates, and some other things that we'll need for both development and production. And then in development, you've got the allowed hosts being our local host, debug being true, the WSGI application for development, and a DB SQLite 3 database setup, with the local host of 3000 being in our course origin whitelist. And then in production, we've got our domain, which we would need to add, the different WSGI application for production, a database setup for Postgres, which we don't actually have those credentials set up just yet, but we've got the configuration there. We've got auth password validators and a static file storage for when we use white noise. And this is all with the intention to eventually host this on Heroku. That's why we have a proc file here, but we'll get into that towards the end. So we also have the source folder, which currently has our app.js, which is auto trying to sign up. We're using React Redux, hence these map state to props and map dispatch methods that we're connecting to our app. We've got a higher order component, which basically returns the children of the props that are passed in. And we've just got a layout, a login, and a sign up container, which again also comes from that video tutorial on authentication with Django and React. And so what we want to achieve in this video is basically to set up the Django REST framework REST auth, which is what we're going to use to authenticate users on the back end, but we're going to need to customize that if we want to actually have our own custom user. So we're going to create our user, we're going to create the serializers for that user, and show you how you can customize the REST auth to allow for those users. So we'll get started by opening up the terminal and just creating ourselves a virtual environment, which we'll just name virtualenv. And there it is. We can then activate that. And we'll say pip install -r requirements.txt. And we'll open up another terminal here to install our node dependencies. So we'll just run npm i. And we can get started with creating ourselves a users app. And this is where we're going to create our custom user. So we'll say python manage.py start app, and we'll say the name is users. And we can go into our home directory to settings base.py. And inside the installed apps, we can scroll down and add our users. And with that, we can close base.py and we'll go into our users app here, and we'll go into the models. And what we're going to do is import the abstract user, which comes from Django's contrib auth models. So we'll say from django.contrib.auth.models, import the abstract user. Now see, you get two types of users that are prompted. One is the base user and one's the abstract user. Now, the abstract base user will require a lot more configuration. I've also covered this in another video where we actually use the abstract base user to create our own custom user and show you how you can link that up to be the default user of your site. Whereas if you use the abstract user, it's actually a lot simpler. So we're going to go ahead and use that. We'll add a class here and call this the user, which inherits from the abstract user. And basically what this means is that it has all those attributes like username, password, email. All of that configuration is done for you, except now you can add the fields that you particularly want to actually add that will make your users that much more unique. Now in our case, we're going to store two kinds of users. We're going to have a student and a teacher. You could be both at the same time, but we're not too worried about that. And so the way that we're going to handle that is by adding two fields on the user. And these are going to be Boolean fields. So we're going to have the isStudent, which will be models.boolean field. So either true or false. And then we'll have the isTeacher, which is also a models.boolean field. So what that means is that when we create the user, we're going to need to pass in whether this user is a student, so either true or false, and we need to pass in if it's a teacher. And then we'll just say define the string method, which takes in self, and we'll say return self.username, because remember, this does inherit from the abstract user. That is our base user, and that is what we'll be using when we create our users. Now, what I'm also going to do is define another class here, which is the student, and this will just be a models.model. And all we're doing is basically assigning a one-to-one field with the user, so that instead of working with the base user that we've created here, we'll work with the student model when we need to refer to an actual student. And we're not going to add too much configuration to this model, but it's just a little bit more convenient because here on the student, you could then pass in a lot more other fields like what classrooms they belong to, what grade they're in, etc. You could do a whole bunch of things like that. Whereas the user, you just want to define whether that user is a student or a teacher. That's the whole purpose of this model. Here we'll just say that the user equals to a one-to-one field with the user that we just created here. And we'll say on delete equals to models.cascade, so that if the user is deleted, then their student is deleted as well. And then we'll just say define string, which takes in self, and say return self.user.email, for example, or username we could do as well. And so with that, we then need to go and tell Django that our default user is actually inside our users app. So we're going to go into the home directory to settings base.py, and we go all the way to the bottom here, and we'll just say that the auth user model equals to users dot user. So basically what it's saying is look inside users.models and find the user model. That is our default auth user model to use when authenticating users. And I'm also going to add one more setting here, which is for unique emails. So we'll say that the account unique email equals to true. Basically, this will ensure that we don't get any duplicate emails of our users. And like that, we can now try and make migrations. So we'll just bring up the terminal. We'll say manage.py make migrations. And we see we get create model user and create model student. And then we'll say manage.py migrate to actually migrate those. And we also get the base migrations for the entire project. And now, if we were to try and create a super user, then you'll see that you'll actually run into an error because it's going to use our custom user, which has 2 extra fields on it. So it's going to tell you that is student cannot be null and is teacher cannot be null in that user. So to create an admin user, we're going to need to create it through the Python shell. So we'll say python manage.py shell. And here we'll say from users.models import user. We'll say that a equals to a user. We'll say that a.username equals to admin. A.password equals to, let's say, dude123. We'll say a.isStaff equals to true, so that it's a staff member. And a.isSuperUser equals true as well. And then just say a.save. And you see that it gives us the user.isStudent cannot be null. So we say a.isStudent, let's set it equal to false. And we'll say a.isTeacher equals to true. And now we can say a.save. And now it's correctly saving. And if we were to say user objects.all, then you can see yet a query set response with the user of admin. So we'll exit out of that now. And let's call python manage.py run server so we can actually run the server and view it in the browser. This is what we have by default because we already have a build directory. Up here in our project, we have the build directory, which is what's being referenced inside our base settings to use as static files. So we could actually come here to the login and let's try and log in with our user. We'll say admin and pass in dude123, and it seems that that didn't work. Let's check the console, and we get a server responded with a status of 400, a bad request. And if we take a look at the server here, it's not giving us any information. It's just saying that the post to this URL wasn't successful. It was a bad request. And the reason for this is purely because we haven't set up REST auth to understand our new custom user, because the custom user is trying to see the default Django user that it's used to, but we're not using the default user. We're using our own custom user. So we need to go into our base.py and we need to configure the REST auth serializers and the REST auth register serializers. And you can check this in their documentation if you just search for custom Django REST auth. Then here the first link is a configuration for Django REST auth 0.9.3. So if we check that out, then here you can see it says you can define your custom serializers for each endpoint without overriding URLs and views by adding REST auth serializers dictionary in your Django settings. Possible key values are the login serializer, the token serializer, the user details serializer, and all these. So for example, it says the REST auth serializers is a dictionary, where the login serializer is a path to a custom login serializer, and the same thing for the token serializer. And it also says here, you can define your custom serializers for registration. However, note, the custom register serializer must define a define save method that returns a user model instance. And that's extremely important if we want to get this right. So first, let's copy this default configuration there. Come back into base, add it there, and we don't need the token serializer. We just need the user details serializer. That's basically to tell REST auth that this is the user model that we're using, and that is the specific serializer for that model. So we'll copy that user details serializer. Let's copy that, paste that there. And obviously the path we'll sort out in a second. And we can also specify the REST auth register serializers, which is also important because we're going to need to handle the kind of registration for our custom user, meaning when the user signs up, they need to say whether they're a student or a teacher, which means that our registration process is going to be different as well. So we'll open up a dictionary here, and in here we need to specify the register serializer. So we'll add it there, and we'll just leave this blank for now. And what we need to do is go back to our users app and actually add a serializer inside it. So we'll just say new file, which will be serializers.py. How I got this to work is purely just by Googling what is required. And so this is primarily focusing on showing you how it comes to work. But the moral of the story is that when you don't understand something and you're trying to figure out what to do, Google it and keep looking for examples of where other people have done it and try to apply that to what you're doing. Now, the first serializer that we're going to create is the user serializer. And this is the one that we've defined here for the user details serializer. So we're going to specify the path here to be users.serializers.user serializer. And we'll take that name, come back into our serializers, and we'll just say class user serializer that inherits from the serializers, and we'll need to import that. So we'll say from REST framework import serializers, and we're going to inherit the model serializer. And if we need to use that, we're going to need our model. So we'll say from .models import user, and here we'll specify the class meta and say the model is a user, and then we'll need to specify the fields. And the fields is just a list of fields on our model that we want to include in the serializer. Now, normally you would have things like the email, you would have the username, and in our case, we're going to also need to pass in the extra fields that we created. So we'll add in password as well, and we're going to add in our is student and our is teacher. And that's it. That's our custom user serializer that REST auth now will use when serializing our user. And now we need to handle the register serializer. So we'll do the same kind of concept. We'll say class custom register serializer, just so that we don't have a really long name. And this is going to inherit from the register serializer. And we can see here in the register serializer class, it's from restauth.registration.views.registerView, and then restauth registration serializers.register serializer. Now you can either create your own custom serializer and handle it as well, or you can inherit from this register serializer and do it that way. So that's how I decided to do it. So we're going to need to import that. So we'll just come back in here and we'll go to the top and say from REST auth, and we can actually remove that. So we're saying from REST auth registration serializers, import the register serializer, and we'll install these. Cool. So now that we have those installed, we've got our register serializer, and we're going to inherit that in our custom register serializer. And this is very similar to a model serializer. We can also specify a class meta and the fields. So I'm going to do that as well. We'll copy all of that right there. However, I'm going to add two fields here as well. So the first one will be the isStudent, and the second one will be the isTeacher. And this will just inherit from the serializers Boolean field, and that'll also be for the isStudent. And now let's actually jump into the front end a little bit to handle that form. So I'm actually going to close the models, and we'll go into the source to our containers, and let's go to the signup. So here we have signup.js, and we've got our registration form. And basically what we want to do is just come all the way down here to the end of the form where we have the submit button, and we want to add another form item inside here, which is basically going to be a select field with two options. The first option will be student and the second one will be teacher. So we'll add a form item, and I'm actually just going to copy the get field decorator and just paste it in there. And inside here we'll want to add our select. So we'll just say select like that, and we need to go to the top and import this from &d, and we'll specify the get field decorator to be user type. So that's how we're going to access it from the form's values, and we'll say please select a user, and we'll get rid of the validator here as well. And inside the select we need to add an option, and inside there will be student and the second one will be teacher. We'll set the value of the first one to be student and the value of the second one to be teacher, and then we can say that the placeholder of the select is select a user type, and we need to import option as well, so we'll import option there. And now we just need to make sure that we handle receiving the value of the option that's currently selected in the form. So we'll go up to the top here, and we'll say let isStudent equal to false initially, and then we'll just grab the user type from the values, because that's how we're doing it currently. We have values.username and email, etc. So we'll say if values.userType equals to student, then we'll say isStudent equals to true. And then here in the onAuth, where we basically register the user, we'll add another field here which will be isStudent, and this will get passed into the onAuth dispatch method. So if we go to the bottom here, we have onAuth, and we just need to make sure we pass that in as a fifth argument. So this will be isStudent, and that gets passed into the auth signup, which is inside our actions, and we'll add it as another argument there as well, just like that. And now we just need to make sure that we handle that in the store. So if you go to store actions auth, then here if we scroll down to the auth signup, we need to make sure that we grab that argument coming in, which is the isStudent, so like that. And what I'm actually going to do is create a constant user, and this user is going to have the username, the email, the password1, password2, and it's going to have isStudent, which is coming through as an argument there. And I'm also going to set the isTeacher to be the opposite of isStudent. So that means if student is true, then teacher is false. Then here when we post to the registration URL, we can, instead of passing this user that only has an email, password1 and password2, we're going to pass the entire object that we just created up here, which is the user object. So we can delete all of that and just pass in user as the object. And what we're going to do is actually change the local storage handling, so that instead of setting the item of a token and an expiration date, we're rather just going to set an entire user which will hold the token, username, and all the details about that user. So that way we can store whether they're a student or a teacher as well. So what I'm going to do is actually get rid of these local storage commands here, but before we do that, we'll create another constant here which will be our user, and this is going to be the user object that we store in the local storage. So it's going to have the token, which will be the response data key, and we just need to reference it with a colon. We're then also going to pass in the username, which will be basically the username that we passed in to the dispatch method, so we don't need to pass a colon there. We're then also going to pass in is student, and we'll pass in is teacher as well. And then we'll set the expiration date here to be a new date, just like how we created it over here, and just use a colon as well. And there we have our user, so we can get rid of these commands here. And then we'll say set the item of user to be json.stringify the user. And we can get rid of the expiration date call there. And instead of calling auth success of a token, we'll pass in a user instead and handle that in a second. But basically, now we're storing this entire user in the local storage, which will come in handy later on as well. And so let's go to the auth success method here, which is all the way up top here. And we'll change it to receive a user instead of a token. And then that user will pass in as the argument here. And we can remove that there. And then we just need to handle that in the reducer. So we'll open up the reducer's auth. We'll go to the auth success. And we'll actually need to add some new state here. So for example, the username will now be null as well. We'll have is student, which will be null. And we'll have is teacher, which will be null as well. And then we can come down here to the auth success, and instead of this coming from action.token, this will be action.user.token. We'll take the username, which will be action.user.username. We'll have is student, which will be action.user.isStudent, and the same kind of concept for is teacher. And we just need to make sure that in the action, when calling auth success, we make sure that, for example, here in the auth check state method, that when we call auth success, we pass in a user and not a token. So instead, up top here, we'll say constant user equals to get item user, and we're going to need to pass that. So we'll say json.pass the local storage user, and that's because this is an object. So we need to pass that into an object. And then we'll say if the user is undefined or the user is null, then dispatch logout. Otherwise, we'll create an expiration date where instead of grabbing this from the local storage, this will now come from user.expiration date, where user is what we just grabbed over here. And we're saying if the expiration date is less than new date, then log out. Otherwise, we will dispatch auth success, which will take in the user. And we'll just save that. And if we go to the logout method as well, then instead of removing the expiration and token, we can just say remove user. We can also open up the terminal to run the front end. So let's just clear some of these terminals out here. And we've got the packages installed. So we'll say npm start. So we'll take a look here, and it says in actions auth we have is teacher is undefined, and that we just need to set to the opposite of is student. And it says that the signup.js doesn't contain an export named option, so let's go to signup, and this is because our option inherits from the select. So we just need to say constant option equals to select dot option. Now if we check it out, now we can log in. Let's click login and click on sign up, and we have a username, email, password, and if we click select a user type, and when we click the drop down here, we see student and teacher as the options for the user type. And let's inspect this here, and let's see what happens if we try sign up. So we'll pass in a username, pass in an email and a password, and we'll pass in a select user type of, let's say, student. And if I click sign up, we see that it gave us a error connection refused, and let's take a look as to why that is. And it says in serializers.get, the register serializer, it got not enough values to unpack, expected 2 but got 1. Now this is because of a very silly error, which is that we didn't actually add a comma here at the end, and even pass in our path to the register serializer. So let's add this path here in our serializers, and this is users.serializers.custom register serializer, just like that. Now let's come back and try login, or sign up rather, again. And if I click student and click sign up, now we get a 500 internal server error. So let's go back and see. And it says here, integrity error, not null constraint failed, users.user.isStudent. So basically what this is telling us is that when the user is being created, it's not being passed in the isStudent and the isTeacher as well. Now the reason for that is because the default save method to actually save a user does not involve using the isStudent or the isTeacher fields. So what we need to do is override the save method. So what I'm going to do is just define the save method here, and we're going to say self and request. And all I'm going to do here is just say print the request, so we actually see it come through. And so with that, let's open up the terminal again, and we'll go to the sign up page, but let's actually get rid of the rerouting here. So if we go to the handle submit, we'll not push ourselves to this URL, so that way we can continuously test this. And from this point here, overriding the save method involves using an adapter which comes from Django's auth. So if we search here for adapter Django auth, and we can just click on this first one here, then here it talks about the advanced usage of creating custom user models and basically creating and populating user instances. And here it says auth account adapter.default account adapter. That is what's used to create an instance of a user. And we can actually navigate to Django's REST auth. And if we go to the introduction, let's go to edit on GitHub, and we'll just go to Django REST auth. And if we click on REST auth, and then we can click on registration, and then serializers.py. And here you can see it has an import from allauth.account.adapter, import the get adapter. And if you scroll down, you'll see the different types of serializers. So they've got the social account, the social login, and if we keep going, we eventually come across the register serializer. And you can see all of the fields on it. You can see the username, the email, password 1 and 2, and then these validation methods, the get clean data, and the save method. And here you can see it's saying adapter equals to get adapter, and then it uses that adapter from Django auth to create a new user using the request. It then uses the adapter to save the user by passing in the request and the user, and then it just adds some extra custom stuff here for the custom sign up and setting up the user email. So what I'm going to do is copy all of that, the save method plus the define get clean data, and we'll come back in here, override the save method, and we're going to need to import the adapter. So let's go all the way to the top here of the file, and we'll say from allauth.account.adapter, import the get adapter. And we're basically going to use their logic. We're going to get the adapter. We're then going to use that to create a new user with the request. We'll assign the cleaned data to self by calling the get cleaned data. And what that does is call the method on this class, which grabs the validated data and grabs the username and all these fields from that. Then using the clean data, it saves the user by passing in that new user, and we can then get rid of the custom sign up and the setup user email. And essentially what we want to do is not only grab the username, password 1 and email, we'll actually want to copy password 1 so we have password 2 that we can see as well. And we actually also want to get two other fields, which are the isStudent and the isTeacher. So now when we call get clean data, we're going to get everything that we need to create our own custom user. We're then assigning it to self.cleanData. And before we go ahead and save the user, we then need to just assign the isStudent field and the isTeacher field to our user. So we'll say user.isStudent equals to self.cleanData isStudent, and do the same thing for isTeacher. And then at the end of that, we can call user.save. And this is very important, this command here, user.save. So now we then use the adapter to save the user and return that user at the end. That's also very important. Whenever you override a save method, you need to return an instance of whatever you're saving. So we return the user, and now let's actually see how this works out. We'll open up the terminal and we see we get one error here, which is just the commas. So let's add some commas there. And now everything's working. So if we come back to the boilerplate, and this is actually on the local host, let's go to port 3000 and click sign up. And look at that. It was a successful post request and we got a status of 201, which means that our user was created. And if you come back here, you can see that it's now saying log out, which means that our user is actually logged in. And that means we can actually go and log in to our admin. So if we go to admin, we're not going to be able to actually log in with our super user that we created earlier. And so let's rather just go and use the user that we just created now and create them as a super user. So we'll go back in here and actually add a new terminal, and we'll say python manage.py shell. We'll say from users.models import user. We'll say mat equals to users.objects.get username equal to mat. And let's just change that. That's meant to be user. And if we check what mat looks like, there it is. And if I say mat.is super user equals true, and mat.is staff equal true, and then save, we can then exit. And if we come back, let's refresh this and we can sign in with Matt. And there we go. We're now logged in and we can actually add our custom user into the admin. So let's do that. So we'll just go here to admin and we'll say from dot models import user, and then say admin.site dot register user. And we'll also want to unregister this groups here. So we'll say from django.contrib.auth.models import the group, and then we'll say admin.site.unregister group. Now let's come back and refresh this. And then we have our users at the bottom, and if we click on it, we have Matt. And if we go all the way down, you can see that we have our isStudent and isTeacher fields, where isStudent is set to true. And so let's actually create one more user here. We'll log out and just refresh this and say username equals to test@gmail, and we'll set the user type to be a teacher. And if we click sign up, we're now logged in. Let's go here, go back to users, we have test, scroll all the way down, and teacher is set to true. And that basically confirms that our sign up is correctly working. We've got a custom user that is able to be successfully created on our front end and in the back end. And so now what we want to do is actually confirm that logging in works. So let's log out here, and we're here on the login page, and let's try and log in with, let's say, Matt, for example. And if I click login, then we get a success as well. And so now we have our users able to log in and to sign up. And so that pretty much sums up everything that we're going to cover in this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a comment down below, let us know what you thought. And otherwise, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.